for 22 minutes. So I'm going to remove my stitch marker and do the next row. I'm going to do the first stitch of my row, and then I'm going to replace my stitch marker. And now in this row, I'm going to decrease every fourth stitch. So I've done 2, and here's the third. And now the fourth stitch I'm going to decrease. So I'm going to pull up a loop, and pull up a loop in the next, and then crochet together. And I'm going to do that all the way around until I get back to my stitch marker. So I'm going to do another 3 single crochets, and then the fourth one I'm going to crochet together. So I've gotten to the end of my row. I'm going to remove my stitch marker again. And then I'm going to do the first stitch of my next row and replace my stitch marker. And now in this row, I'm going to decrease every third stitch. So here's the second, and now the third stitch, I'm going to pull up a loop and pull up a loop in the next, and then I'm going to crochet together. And I'm going to continue to do that every 3 stitches all the way around until I get back to my stitch marker. So I've gotten to the end of my next row and done my last decrease. So I'm going to remove my stitch marker and do the first stitch of my next row. And then I'm going to put back my stitch marker. And in this row, I'm going to decrease the very next stitch. I'm going to decrease every second stitch. So the next stitch, I'm going to pull up a loop and pull up a loop in the next, and then crochet together. And I'm going to do that every second stitch all the way around until I get back to my stitch marker. Okay, I have gotten to the end of my row, so I am going to pull open my loop and I'm going to add a little bit of fiber fill. Okay, I've finished stuffing the top part, and now I'm going to do my next row. So I'm going to remove my stitch marker and do the first stitch of my row. And I'm also going to be careful to not pull up any of that fiber fill. I'm going to pull up my loop and single crochet. And then I'm going to replace my stitch marker, and then I'm going to increase this stitch. So I'm going to go back into the same stitch and pull up another loop, and then I'm going to single crochet again. And now in this row, I'm going to increase every stitch. So every stitch all the way around, I'm going to add 2 stitches. And I'm going to continue increasing until I get back to my stitch marker. Okay, I've gotten back to my stitch marker, and now I'm going to remove it and do my next row. So I'm going to do the first stitch of my row and then put back my stitch marker. And now in this row, I'm going to increase every second stitch. So there's the second one, and now I'm going to go back into that stitch and do a second single crochet. And I'm going to do that every second stitch all the way around until I get back to my stitch marker. So I have gotten back to my stitch marker again, and now I'm going to remove it and do the first stitch of my row. And then I'm going to put my stitch marker back. And now I'm going to go on for 4 more rows without adding any more increases or decreases. So I'm going to continue for 4 more rows, and I'm going to move my stitch marker to the first stitch of the row every time I complete a row. So I have gotten to the end of 4 more rows without adding any more increases. So now I'm going to make the inside of the mouth. I'm going to use my blue yarn, and I'm going to start with a slip knot. And now I'm going to insert my hook into that slip knot, and then I'm going to chain 10. Okay, I've done my 10 chains, and now into that third chain from the hook, I'm going to insert my hook, and then I'm going to do a slip stitch. And now I'm going to slip stitch in every chain until I get back to the end of the row where I did my slip knot. So I'm going to pull up a loop in the next chain and do a slip stitch. Okay, I've gotten to the end of the chain, and now I'm going to chain up to make my next row. And now I'm going to go into that slip knot that I made, and I'm going to single crochet 2 more times. So I'm going to pull up a loop and single crochet, and then back into that stitch, I'm going to pull up another loop and single crochet. I'm going to tighten my slip knot a little bit so that there's not a big hole showing in that spot, and then I'm going to reinsert my hook, and now I'm going to single crochet along this side until I get to the end of the end of the row. So I'm going to insert my hook into the next stitch and single crochet, and now I'm just going to continue to single crochet until I get to the end. Okay, I've gotten to the end of the row, and now just like I did in the last side, I'm going to do 3 single crochets into the end. So there is my third single crochet in that last stitch. And now I'm going to turn the work slightly and single crochet along the other side. So I'm going to go into the next stitches and single crochet, and then I'm going to continue until I get to the opposite end so I can increase again. Okay, I've gotten to the end, so I'm going to do my increase again. So I'm going to put 2 more stitches into this same stitch. And now I'm going to continue to single crochet along the side until I get to the opposite end where I'm going to do another increase. Okay, so I've gotten to the opposite side, and now I'm going to do another increase. So I'm going to do 3 single crochets into the same stitch. And now I'm going to continue to crochet along the side again until I get to the opposite side where I'm going to add another increase. Okay, I've gotten to the opposite side again, and now I'm going to do my increase. So I'm going to do 3 single crochets into this same stitch. And now I'm going to continue on until I get to the middle. So I'm going to single crochet 6 more times. And now at the middle, I'm going to add a couple of half double crochets. So I'm going to do a half double crochet in the next stitch. So I'm going to yarn over and pull through all 3 of those loops. And now I'm going to do a double crochet into the same stitch. So I'm going to yarn over again and pull up a loop. And then I'm going to pull through 2 and then pull through the remaining 2. So now I have a half double and a double crochet, and I'm going to do one more half double crochet into the same stitch. So yarn over, pull through all 3. And now I'm going to go on until I get to the opposite side, where I'm going to do another increase, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite side. So I've gotten to the end, and I'm going to do my increase. And now I'm just going to get to the same spot on the opposite side from where I added that half double crochet and double crochet. And then I'm going to put it at the same spot on the other side. So I've gotten to about the opposite side, so I'm going to do my half double crochet. I'm going to yarn over, pull up a loop, and pull through all 3. Then yarn over, pull up a loop, pull through 2, and pull through 2. Now I'm going to do another half double crochet, all in the same stitch. And now I have the corners of the mouth. So I'm going to continue to single crochet until I get to the end of this side of the piece. Okay, so I have gotten to the end. So I'm just going to do a slip stitch to end this part. And then I'm going to cut off my yarn. Next, I'm going to put this mouthpiece into this area and attach it. So before I do that, I'm going to move the end of my row to the middle of the back of the head. And as you can see, the beginning of my row has been moving slightly to the side as I've been working, but I'm going to single crochet until I get to the middle of the back of the head, and then I'm just going to replace my stitch marker there. Okay, I've gotten to a spot where I can put my stitch marker. And now that my stitch marker is moved to the back of the head, I'm going to line up the mouth with the front of the head. So I'm going to line up both of the corners where I want the corners of the mouth to go. And I'm going to take a scrap of yarn, and I'm going to use that scrap of yarn to mark the spots on the row that I want to put the mouth in. So I'm going to pull one side of my yarn through that side, and then I'm going to use the other side to mark the opposite side. And then I'm just going to remove the mouthpiece for now. And then I'm going to single crochet up to my marked stitch. So I've gotten to that stitch that I marked. I'm going to go into that stitch, and I'm going to remove that stitch marker first. And I'm going to do a single crochet. And then the next stitch, I'm going to take the mouthpiece, and I'm going to, instead of going into the white part, I'm going to go into the corner of the mouth and single crochet along the blue part here. And I'm going to go into the loops that are at the top of the work, and I'm going to leave those bottom loops facing the outside of the work. So there are 2 loops here. This one I'm going to leave to the outside, and then I'm going to go into that back loop. I'm going to pull up a loop, and then I'm going to single crochet. And I'm going to single crochet in the back loops of every stitch all the way across this top mouthpiece until I get to that opposite corner where I'm going to start crocheting on the white part again. Okay, I've gotten to the opposite corner and I have single crocheted into that corner of the blue part. So now I'm going to go into that stitch that I marked on the opposite side. So I'm just going to pull up a loop and then single crochet into the white part. And now I'm just going to single crochet until I get to my stitch marker. So I have gotten to the end of my row and I'm going to remove my stitch marker. And do the first stitch of my next row and put my stitch marker back. And now I'm going to single crochet until I get to these stitches that I just created on the front part of the mouth. So I'm going to single crochet until I get to that area. So I am on the stitch right before the first stitch into the blue area. So in these stitches, I'm going to once again just go into the back loops of the single crochet. So I'm going to go into those upper loops there and leave the ones on the bottom so that they'll be open to the front of the work and I can come back and crochet on top of those loops later. So I'm just going to single crochet across all of these loops. So as you can see, I've finished crocheting on all of these top loops, and now you can see the bottom loops are showing to the outside of the work, and I'm going to use those loops to come back later and crochet on top another row. But for now, I'm going to continue along the side doing single crochets until I get back to my stitch marker. So I've gotten back to my stitch marker and I'm going to pull open my work, and now I'm going to stuff the bottom of the mouthpiece with some fiber fill. Okay, and as you can see, I can still add a bit more stuffing through the bottom of the mouth, so I'm going to continue. I'm going to remove my stitch marker and do the first stitch of my row. And in this row, I'm just going to go all the way around without doing any more increases or decreases, and I'm just going to continue until I get back to the end of the row. And before I go any farther, I'm going to put my stitch marker back. And now I'm just going to continue until I get back to my stitch marker. So now I'm going to remove my stitch marker again. I've gotten to the end of my row, and I'm going to do my first stitch of the row, and then I'm going to replace my stitch marker. And now in this row, I'm going to do a decrease every 5th stitch. So I'm going to go on until I get to the 5th stitch, and then I'm going to pull up a loop and pull up a loop in the next, and then crochet together. And I'm going to do that every 5th stitch all the way around. Okay, I have gotten to the end of my row, and now I'm going to pull open my stitch and I'm going to make the nose. So I'm going to be using my orange yarn to make the nose. I'm going to start with a magic circle. I'm going to wrap my yarn around my fingers twice, and then I'm going to take my yarn in my other hand and I'm going to pull up a loop through the middle of those two loops. And then I'm going to chain one. And now into those loops, I'm going to single crochet 5 more times. And now I have a total of 6 stitches on my magic circle. So I'm going to close the circle just like I did for the other part of my work. I'm going to pull a little bit on the tail, and then I'm going to take that smaller loop from the side closest to the tail, and I'm going to pull on that loop from that side, and I'm going to pull on that loop until the other loop closes completely, and then I'm going to pull on the tail to close the other loop. Okay, and now in this row, I'm going to single crochet into that first stitch that I made. And I'm going to use a bobby pin once again to mark the first stitch of my row. So I'm on the second stitch of my row, and in this row I'm going to increase every second stitch. So I'm going to go back into the same stitch and do another single crochet. And then the next stitch, I'm just going to do 1 single crochet. And the one after that, I'm going to once again increase. So I'm going to do 2 single crochets into that same stitch. Next stitch, I'm just going to do 1 single crochet. And then I'm going to increase the last stitch of the row. So now I've gotten back to my stitch marker, I'm going to remove it. And now I'm going to single crochet into the next row and put my stitch marker back. So now I'm going to do 3 more rows of single crochet without adding any more increases. So I'm just going to continue for 3 more rows. So I have gotten to the end of my row, and I'm going to remove my stitch marker. And in this row, I'm going to decrease the first stitch. So I'm going to pull up a loop to do my first stitch, and then I'm going to pull up a loop in the next, and then I'm going to decrease that stitch. And now I'm going to put my stitch marker back. And now I'm just going to single crochet once in every other stitch of the row. So I've gotten to the end of my row. I'm going to remove my stitch marker again. And once again, I'm going to decrease that first stitch of the row. So I'm going to pull up a loop, and pull up a loop in the next, and crochet together. And now I'm going to put my stitch marker back. And then I'm going to single crochet 1 time in every other stitch of the row. Okay, I've gotten to the end of my row again, and this time I'm not going to do a decrease. So I'm just going to single crochet once in every stitch of the row. First I'm going to put my stitch marker back. And now I'm just going to continue to single crochet in every other stitch of the row. Okay, I've gotten to the end of my row again, so I'm going to remove my stitch marker and I'm going to do another decrease at the beginning of this row. So I'm going to pull up a loop and pull up a loop in the next stitch. and I'm going to decrease. Then I'm going to put my stitch marker back. And then I'm going to single crochet in every other stitch of the row until I get back to my stitch marker. So I have finished with that row, and now I'm going to put a little bit of fiber fill into the nose. I'm going to use the end of my hook to push the fiber fill into the nose. And now I've stuffed the nose, so I'm going to continue. I'm going to remove my stitch marker. And now I'm going to decrease the next stitch. So I'm going to pull up a loop and pull up a loop in the next. And crochet together. And then I'm going to do another decrease. So I'm going to pull up another loop and pull up another loop in the next. And then I'm going to crochet those together. I'm going to do one more single crochet in the next stitch. So I'm going to go into that next stitch, pull up a loop and single crochet. And then I'm just going to do a slip stitch to end the row. So into that next stitch, I'm going to pull up another loop, and then I'm going to do a slip stitch. And then I'm just going to cut off my yarn. And I'm going to leave a long tail so that I can use that tail to sew the nose to the rest of the face after I have attached it. So I'm going to use my my hook, and I'm going to pull that tail toward the back of the nose, toward the thicker end where I started. And now that I've finished making the nose, I'm going to continue with the actual head part. So I'm going to do my first stitch of the row and replace my stitch marker. And now in this row, I'm going to decrease every fourth stitch until I get to the front of the nose. So in that fourth stitch, I'm going to pull up a loop and pull up another and then crochet together. And I'm going to do that in every fourth stitch until I get to the front. So I've finished with my last decrease before the front of the face where I'm going to add the nose. So I'm going to chain 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And now I'm going to go into the next stitch and do a single crochet. And now I'm going to use this hole to thread my nose through. I'm going to stick it through the thin end first, and I'm going to take that thin end and pull it through until the nose is sticking mostly out. Okay, and now I have a small amount of it in the inside of the head, and most of it is sticking out toward the outside. And now I'm going to take my tail, which I've already threaded on my needle, and I'm going to use that tail to sew on the nose to that chain that I made. And I'm just going to sew around the base of the nose to the inside part of the bottom of the white part of the face. And then I'm going to stick my needle up through to the top of the nose. And then I'm going to sew onto those chains that I made in this last row. So I'm going to go into one of the loops of the chains, and I'm going to go through the orange part 2, and I'm just going to sew around all of those chains that I made. And now I'm just going to finish sewing the other side of the nose to the inside part of the white part of the head. And then after I do that, I'm just going to sew in that tail end. So I've finished with attaching the nose, so now I'm going to continue. And I'm also going to continue to decrease every 4th stitch, just like I was in the row before I added the nose. So I'm going to do my decrease on the 4th, and then I'm going to continue to decrease every 4th stitch until I get to the end of the row. So I've gotten to the end of the row. I'm going to pull open my stitch, and next I'm going to make the eyes before I continue. So as you can see, I've already made one. I'm going to show you how to make the other one. I'm going to start with a magic circle with my white yarn. I'm going to loop my yarn around my fingers twice, and then I'm going to take my hook and pull up a loop and chain 1. And now I'm going to want to have 8 stitches total. So the chain 1 counted as my first stitch. Now I'm going to single crochet 7 more onto my magic circle so that I have a total of 8. Okay, and now that I have my 8 stitches, I'm going to close the magic circle just like I've been doing this whole time. I'm going to pull on that tail a little bit, and then I'm going to find the smaller loop, find the end closest to the tail, and pull from that end to close the other loop. And then I'm going to pull on the tail to seal that other loop. And now I have my magic circle complete. And now I'm going to continue. So for this row, I'm just going to do a row of slip stitches all the way around. I'm going to go into that first stitch that I made and pull up a loop, and then I'm going to slip stitch. And then I'm going to slip stitch in every other stitch all the way around. So I've gotten to the end of my row and I've done my last slip stitch, so I'm just going to cut off my yarn. And now this is going to be the front part of the eye. I'm going to pull those tails to the back of the work so that they don't show from the front of the eye. And now I'm going to make the back part of the eye. It's going to start out just about the same way with a magic circle. And once again, I'm going to pull my loop up through the middle of those loops and chain 1. And then I'm going to do another 7 single crochets into those loops, just like I did in my previous part. Okay, I've gotten my total of 8 stitches. So once again, I'm going to close the magic circle. I'm going to pull on the tail slightly, find the smaller loop, and I'm going to close the bigger loop by pulling on the smaller loop. And then I'm going to close that loop by pulling on the tail. And now for this piece, I'm going to do a second row. So I'm going to, instead of doing my row of slip stitches right now, I'm going to do another row of single crochets, but in this row, I'm going to increase every stitch. So I'm going to single crochet twice into the same stitch. And I'm going to continue increasing every stitch all the way around. Okay, I've gotten to the end of that row, so now I'm just going to slip stitch, and then I'm going to do my row of slip stitches all the way around, just like I did on the other side. So I've gotten to the end of my row of slip stitches, so I'm going to do my last slip stitch, and then I'm going to cut off my yarn. And now, as you can see, I've used this black part to attach the two pieces together, so I'm going to show you how to do that. I have this black brad here, and I'm going to use this brad. I'm going to stick it through the middle of my magic circle for the white part of the eye. And now I'm going to use the tip of the same brad to go through the magic circle of the other part of the eye, the back part. And I'm going to make sure that on both sides the slip stitch row that I made is facing the front of the piece. And I'm just going to slip that brad through the middle of the magic circle. And then I'm going to open up that brad at the back. So I'm going to pull apart the two arms of the brad. And then just press them down flat against the back of the piece. And now I'm going to use the tails, and I'm going to sew the white part onto the gray part, just so that it doesn't come apart.